Hey guys, Will here. Today we're going to be kicking off our much awaited video series on wrapping. So as you can see, the MX-5 is now completely wrapped and super stoked with how it's turned out. So what we're going to be doing in this video series is breaking up sort of the key fundamentals of wrapping. Now, I don't claim to be the world's expert wrapper by any means, but I have picked up a bunch of tips and tricks and things that I would do differently if I was starting again. So in this video, we're going to focus on wrapping door handles. Pretty simple thing to do, and it's a good thing to start with because it's removed from the car entirely. And if you're not sure how to remove the door handles and mirrors and parts from an MX-5, make sure you check out the video linked above right now for you. But because you can remove it from the car, it makes it very easy to sort of manipulate and get into position. So it's a good piece to start off with wrapping. Next, we'll move on to how to wrap a door and a quarter panel. Then we'll look at wrapping the side skirts as well, which was a little bit more tricky. And then finally, we'll look at the techniques involved in wrapping bumper bars. We can see we've got the front and rear bumper bar done as well. So hopefully by the end of this video series, you'll have a pretty good idea on what's involved with wrapping yourself if you were to tackle a project like this on your own. So let's get stuck into it. Alright, so what you can see before me here is a couple of pieces of wrap that are a little bit bigger than the area that we're going to be wrapping. So this is going to be the door handle, and then this is going to be the underside part as well. So we've cut those off, but we'll set them aside for now. The first thing we need to do is clean this all up and remove the parts that we're going to need to wrap around as well. So we're also going to want to remove this little seal here. That's going to have to go because we need to wrap the wrap around the back side of that. So we'll remove this. And different cars will be a little bit different in this regard, but you're going to have a similar kind of concept on most. So we'll take these bolts off. And remove this screw as well. Alright, so I've removed that plastic seal, and you can see around here that the area is absolutely filthy. The next thing we want to do is remove the key barrel as well. Now, to do that in this car, all we need to do is just move this little tab over here. And it just slides out like that. Easy. We'll pop that back down so it's not under tension. So that's our key out of the way. And there's also a little rubber seal here as well, which will pop out. Now that was actually missing on the other side of the car, so I might actually take it out and just leave it out in this side as well. So now we've got all of our surfaces that we're going to be working with clear and ready for wrapping, but what we need to do now is clean this whole thing up, because obviously the wrap is not going to stick to anything that's dirty. So the other thing we're going to want to do as well is make sure that we clean up any imperfections in the paintwork as well. Now there's a little bit of a mark here which I just need to sand off a little bit just to make sure the wrap sits flat. What happens is if there's any imperfections in the paint, when the wrap sort of adheres to it, you'll get a ripple or a divot, or it really sort of amplifies any imperfections in the paint. So we want to make sure we've got a nice clean smooth surface. So I'll get a little piece of sandpaper and just flatten that part off quickly. So I'm just using a little piece of 1200 grit sandpaper and just smoothing that off so it's nice and flat. That way when we wrap it, we won't have any issues. So that is all good now. So to actually clean the surface, we want to use isopropyl alcohol. Now I bought this big drum of the stuff because I knew that I'd be getting through a bit. It is way overkill. You don't need 5 litres, but it just depends on what's available in your area. So we pour some onto an applicator pad. Now this applicator pad's really dirty, but that doesn't matter for now because all we're doing is just giving it a rough clean, and then we'll go over it again at the end with a clean pad and get the rest of the dirt off. So we're running around the outsides. Getting in all these little bits. Now you do need to be really careful with isopropyl alcohol in a confined space because it's very, very dangerous if you get it in your eyes or if you inhale it as well. It can actually make you go blind if you inhale it straight. Obviously we want to make sure we're clean on the inside of this surface as well so that the wrap will stick to it. And up underneath the door handle as well. Obviously you're going to have a lot of dead skin cells and stuff like that sitting there, so get underneath there, give it a really good clean. And make sure you go along the top edge of the handle as well where you're going to be tucking the wrap around. Alright, now once you're happy that you've got it basically clean like that, we'll go over it again with a clean towel. Just making sure we get every single little surface. You cannot be overly cautious when you're cleaning because if you don't clean properly, the whole job is going to be a complete waste of time. And what will happen is, you know, you'll spend an extra 5 minutes cleaning, then you'll spend an hour wrapping something, you find you didn't clean it properly and you're going to redo the whole thing. So it's much better to spend an extra 5 minutes cleaning than it is to have to rewrap something, not to mention the wastage as well. So this is getting pretty close now. What I'm going to do now is run around this inside edge with a cotton tip as well, just to make absolutely sure that we're all good. So get some isopropyl on that. And put the lid back on. You can see there's still quite a bit of dirt there that's coming off, so it just goes to highlight the importance of doing this. Now you can see here there's a little bit of a ridge here and it's going to be pretty much impossible to get the inside of that clean. So what we'll do is we'll give it the best shot we can, but we're probably going to end up not having to be too worried about it because what will happen is the wrap will go over it, and then when we put our rubber seal back over the top, it's going to kind of seal that in anyway. So we don't need to be too careful about this edge in terms of when we're wrapping, but we do still need to obviously make sure that it's nice and clean. So I'm pretty happy with that now. We'll run over the front surface again with our cleaner towel and get any dirt off from our hands. Alright, so at this point what we want to do is give our hands a really, really thorough clean so that we don't transfer any dirt back onto the handle. So I'll go and do that and I will come back. Alright, so what we want to do is take our piece of wrap and kind of just put it on with the top half about 1/2 centimetre from where we're going to tuck it over. And just run our fingers down like this to get any air bubbles out. And we've deliberately left a larger piece along the bottom here because we're going to want to be able to tuck that underneath where we put our hands. So you can see here the wrap kind of naturally follows the contours of what we're trying to wrap without having to use any heat. Now, what we don't want to do here is stretch the material too much around the curve because what will happen is it'll naturally try to get back to its original shape. So if you put too much tension on the wrap when you peel it around, when it tries to pull back into its natural shape, it'll start to retract and you'll end up with edges that come loose and all that sort of stuff. So what we want to do is we want to try and get as much of a wraparound as we possibly can before we start stretching. So we're just kind of conforming the material around. And once we've done that, we're going to trim around the edges, giving ourselves about a 1/2 centimetre gap to the edge. So we'll just run around. Like so. And do the same thing on the other side as well. So alright, so you can see now we've got an edge that basically follows the shape of the handle. So what we want to do is we want to just sort of tuck the wrap around. Now it's a little bit tricky because there's a few edges here that we don't want to get stuck up against the edge. So we're going to need to pull the handle up and then kind of tuck it around. So we'll start off on the top here and tuck it in. And what we want to try and do is avoid creases on the edge that we can see there. And then once we're happy with the edge, run our squeegee tool along it like that and just kind of tuck it in. So we'll get our hand in behind, peel the whole thing up. Now it's a little bit tricky. I'm going to kind of keep my finger in there. And you can see what I'm doing is I'm just tucking it under, following the contours around. Like so. And then we'll run along the edge with our squeegee tool. And stick it all down. So that's our top edge sorted out. Pretty easy. Now what we're going to want to do is conform the wrap around into the right shape to get underneath here. So again, we'll fold this up so you can see. So what we're going to do along this edge is kind of fold the material around. And you see here we've got an edge here that we're going to need to trim. So what we'll do is we'll make a couple of cuts. Like so. So now what we can do is we can fold this one in one direction and the other part in the other direction like that. And then we'll just trim this piece off like so. And you can see on this side it looks perfectly fine. So the idea is you need to stretch the material around just a little bit, just enough to get around that hard edge, and then we can stretch it flat. So this is pretty tricky because you kind of got to hold the handle up while you do it. But what we're wanting to do is we wanting to bring the material around without any creases. Kind of work it into position, and we're going to have to do the same thing on this side here as well, with a small little cut just to get us around the corner. So again, go one direction and then the other direction, and then trim off the excess. Now obviously you can see here we're going to have a problem because we can't stretch around here. So what we'll do is we'll take our knife, and this is all kind of tricky to do one-handed, but we're just going to make a little cut along this edge, like so, another cut along this edge, and then we can fold this piece flat, like that, fold this piece flat like that. And obviously we don't need to have this piece of material here, so we can trim around around the outside and remove this piece. So running along flat again up to the middle. We're going to do exactly the same thing on this side as well. 1, 2, so we can now fold that flat, fold this side flat, and cut off our excess. Okay, so we run our finger along, make sure it's nice and flat, and you can see I've tucked in enough there that when we put our fingers around we'll still have a nice edge. So looking at the front, you can see the corners are nice and flat, there's no bunching up in the edges, and it looks nice and professional. So what we want to do now is we want to just run around with our squeegee once more, make sure that everything is tucked in really nice and there's no opportunities for any air or anything to get in around the edges. So there's a couple of little edges just in there that I'll need to push a little bit flatter. I might need to use my other plastic tool for that. Now the critical thing here is it doesn't matter if you've got little bubbles that you can see in the middle, but we want to make sure that the edges are pushed completely flat so there's no opportunity for dirt to get into the cracks and then start lifting the wrap. So once we're happy with that, put it down, and what I like to do next is just hit it with a heat gun for a couple of seconds just to kind of set the adhesive and make it nice and tacky so it won't move around. That also helps to reset the memory on the film as well. So we talked before about stretching and not wanting to stretch the material too much before you set it down, because you don't want to have tension on the edges. So what the heat will allow us to do is to actually reset the memory of the film so that it doesn't try to retract back at all, even though we haven't used any heat. And that is an important thing to mention here, is that up until this point we haven't used any heat. We've actually wrapped the whole piece without using any heat, and that's important because it means we haven't stretched the material beyond its capacity. It's nice and even across the whole surface. We're not stretching the adhesive, we're not modifying and distorting the pattern and the color of the material by stretching it out. Particularly with metallic finishes, as you stretch the material out, the color does distort and change a little bit. So, and you'll see a little bit more about that when we wrap some of the larger panels on the car, but it's really important to try and wrap as much of it as you possibly can cold. Now, the other thing that you'll notice as well is that I didn't push down the edges until I'd flattened this part off. And the idea there is that we don't want to trap any air underneath that will then have to pin prick out. So the wrap does have air egress features built into it, so you can squeegee out little bubbles relatively easily, but it's always best to allow the wrap to settle in a way that there's always a pathway for air to come out. So say we had a bubble here, we'd want to be able to squeegee it up this way. So if you've already sealed that edge, there's nowhere for the air to go, you're going to have to find another path. So always try to squeeze the bubbles out before you start to wrap around the edge. So we'll hit it with a heat gun now and set that down, and then we'll set to work on the bottom half. Alright, so we get our heat gun. We're not going crazy with it, we're not going to get it super hot, we're just heating it up enough to make sure that there's no hidden bubbles underneath and that we've reset the memory. So that is all we need to do there, and we're ready to move on to the next piece. Just make sure that no corners have lifted as well, obviously, as you are heating it up. So that's all looking good. Push down any little air bubbles and we're ready to move on. So the next thing you want to do now is, because you've been handling this quite a bit, we're gonna clean that off again with our microfiber towel and alcohol. And again, we'll take our piece of wrap and just kind of lay it over. Now, obviously, we're going to want to try and tuck the wrap into this area as far as we possibly can. Now, I'm just going to clean that off a little bit more inside there because I'm not super happy with how it feels. It still feels like it's a little bit grubby in there, so a bit more of a clean. Yeah, that's better. So take our material, make sure your hands are nice and clean still at this point. And what you want to do is kind of start at the bottom edge here, making sure you've got enough to tuck under. and we don't want to have any tension on the film. So lift up the handle like so. And just run the film up like that. Now what we're going to want to do is make a couple of small cuts, and it's very tricky to do this with one hand. We're going to make a cut here and a cut here just so that we can run the film up. And you can see here I've got a nice clean edge already. So along this edge we're just going to go like that. Same deal on the other side as well. Obviously be very careful not to cut your hand. Like that. And that allows us to just kind of get our material roughly into position. So we'll do the same thing on this side as well. And here, now this is just a rough cut just to allow us to get the material to where we need it to be, and you can see my knife is starting to get a little bit blunt too. We need to do something about that, but that's that. So what we want to do now is we want to kind of stretch the material a little bit just to get it nice and flat. Work it into the corners. Same thing on this side as well, just kind of lift it up, pull it a little bit so we don't have any dodgy creases inside there. Now we need to just extend this cut a little bit further, like so. We'll go around this edge and up so that we can remove this piece. And that allows us to tuck this in. The hardest part about this is just not having enough hands to kind of hold everything at once, but you can see what I'm trying to do. We'll slice across here as well. Take that piece off. Tuck our wrap in along this edge. We'll use our little plastic tool here. Okay, and that's given us enough that we can kind of release it for now. So what we want to do now is we want to kind of start off on this corner. Do exactly the same thing as we did before, kind of just tuck the wrap around, massage it into position, making sure we're not stretching it too far. So we don't want to put lots of tension on it, we just want to kind of work it around. Like so, and you can see I've got a nice flat edge there that I'll be able to trim later on. The thing you've got to be really careful here is you don't want to pinch on this edge and trap air along here. You want to kind of work the air around as you wrap it. So work the air around, make sure you've got no bubbles along this edge as well. Keep working it around. Get over this side, and again we're going to kind of want to contour the wrap around. Like so. And we'll run along with our squeegee. Get it all nice and sealed down. And then we can continue along. The top edge here. There we go. Now we don't need to worry too much about this material because we will be trimming most of that off. So we'll just kind of set it down there for now. So remembering what I mentioned before about not wanting to trap air, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working all of the air up towards this area here so it can come out. So that gives us an area to work the air towards so that we're not creating any bubbles. So what we're going to need to do is use a little bit of heat to stretch the material around, but we want to try and work it with our finger as much as we can before we start to use heat, because you'll see the material does actually have quite a bit of stretch in it just using your finger. So we'll work it around a little bit, but what we don't want to do is be pushing our finger in and make a stretch mark. So we're just kind of massaging it into position, and you'll kind of feel when it starts to get to its limit, because it starts to get a little bit stretchy and feels a bit like an elastic band. So just using our finger to get around these contours. Same deal with the keyhole as well. We just kind of stretch it in there. And once we get as far as we sort of feel like we can, we just want to apply a little bit of heat. Now we really don't need much, just... And you'll see that the material kind of stretches hard, and you'll see now I can push in quite a bit more, and what I'm doing is I'm just kind of working the material onto the edges of that keyhole. So what I'll do is I'll create a little relief cut in the middle here, kind of in a star pattern. Now I've got to be careful that I don't stretch the material too much because I don't want to tear it all the way down to the edge. So what I'm wanting to do is just kind of work the material around until it's all the way up against that edge, and then I can cut around the outside with my knife. So heat it up again. And just kind of work it around. Like so. And you can see that those stretches haven't gone beyond the edges of the keyhole, and we're left with a nice edge that we can trim around later on. So tuck that in. Now we want to do the same thing. We want to heat up around here, and this is the point where I'll probably put my glove on just so that my finger doesn't get stuck on the surface. So put my glove on, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be working the material in around the contours, working the air up towards that hole in the top. So we don't want to be pushing in the middle and trapping air on one side. We just want to work it across. So a little bit of heat, not too much, and just work the material in. And when you feel the material start to retract back again, is the time to add a little bit more heat. So again, we don't want to put too much pressure down. Just working it in. Now we want to make sure obviously that we're working this direction, not that direction, because otherwise we're going to end up trapping air there. So go back to here again. You can feel we need a little bit more heat here because it's starting to get a bit tight. So as you can see, you really don't need much. working it in. It doesn't matter that we got a little ripple there because we'll end up fixing that anyway, but we're going to work the air up towards here now where there's this exit point here. So, cross. Bit more heat again. And we're done. So you can see there's a bit of an area here where we've got a bit of a problem because the material's kind of stretched a little bit. So what we can do is we can put a little patch there. Because it's a straight line, it won't matter too much, and you can't really see it with the door handle closed anyway. So we'll run around and we'll patch that up, but you can see it's all kind of pushed in pretty flat. There's no bubbles anywhere. There's a little bit of a bubble here, but we can kind of just work that out. And we're all good. So the next thing we need to do is trim around inside here, tidy up around the edges with our knife, and we're pretty much done. And of course we don't want to forget this area up the top here either. So get our knife in, run along the edge. It's tricky to get to, but like that. As I mentioned, there's a couple of little ripples there, but you'll never see them. What I might do is just run a tiny little bit of wrap around this corner here, just so that it's the same color. So grab one of my offcuts. Wrap it around like that. And there we go. So I got one small little ripple there from rushing and being anxious on camera, but other than that, it looks pretty good. And what we'll do is we'll just run over that with our squeegee tool, push it out. That's barely noticeable. So what we want to do now is we want to just trim around this edge so that we can put our barrel back in, our lock barrel. So get our knife, and we want to just kind of push the knife against the edge that we're wanting to trim. So run it around. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of leave the off-cut parts, the dags, kind of sitting in there, because what that'll do is that'll help to get trapped by the barrel and it'll kind of hold them in place. But you can see that there's no of the original material at all visible. Pop that in place. All looks good. Now you can see the importance of having clean hands. I've already got some marks on there from dirt, but that'll wipe off again, no problem. So we'll just clean that off. And job done. Okay, so that's it, guys. Pretty straightforward to wrap a door handle. It's a little bit tricky and fiddly, but it's pretty easy in the great scheme of things. And because it's a nice small piece that you can manipulate and move into position, it's a good piece to start off with. So make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one as well. Tomorrow we'll be looking at how to wrap the door, and then we'll be moving on to the other parts of the car as well. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.